everybody can see this nice and clear.
It looks beautiful, Tracy. Great table shop.
Now, the kit actually comes with that little ribbon that's in there. This is the piece that we're working on, and we're using multiple techniques for this and a variety of products, and we're going to run through them really quickly. Now, when I did mine originally, this is what I used. I used the fluid acrylics. Unfortunately, given the current situation, they are very difficult to find, as most paints are. And so I went looking through my existing Americana paints and to see what I could find that would substitute quite easily. And this is what I came up with. This is Ultra Blue Deep. You could also use Ultramarine Blue. Actually, you only use deep blue. So an ultramarine blue or the ultra blue deep will work just fine.
Go up in the corner and just tap.
And the other I used is Laguna, which is sort of a light teal color. So you could use this quite easily, or you could even go lighter than this.
Oh, okay.
So
and then I just
I think, and if that's what she says,
for
then
it,
that's it.
you could
and
use
then
the
how do I?
blue,
Or you can,
or you could use. Oh, where did it go? I think it's called Blue Sky. Here it is here. Yeah, Aqua Sky. So you could use any one of these blues. It's going to give you a similar effect, not identical, obviously, because you're not using exactly the same thing, but it will give you the right color combination to get this overall effect, and that's what we're looking for. So in my case, I'm going to work with the Laguna and the Ultramarine Blue, or the Ultra Blue Deep. The other thing that I'm using is gesso, and it doesn't have to be this brand. It can be any brand of gesso. It will work just fine. If you don't have the gesso, then you can use any one of the texture mediums, the modeling paste or the texture medium itself, or even a heavy gel medium will work just fine. All you're going to do is create a little bit of surface texture, so it isn't imperative that it be exactly this. So that. The other thing I'm using is matte medium. And again, I realize that this is often difficult to get. And so you can use, and I loathe to use the word, but you could use a matte Mod Podge, or you can use a DecoArt's decoupage, or you could use a clear gel medium. All we're using this for is an adhesive. It's going to be a transparent one. We're using it as an adhesive, and we're using it as a sealer. So this little tag is going to be done with that. So any one of those will work just fine. So dig through your stash, and you'll be able to find something that will substitute quite easily. You need a little bit of gold metallic. Doesn't really matter what brand, we just want something bright. If you can't find gold, then a brass metallic will work just fine. Rose gold would work just fine. I mean, whatever you have, we're just looking for a bright metallic. Then we need a warm white or a titanium white. That will work just fine, and we're using a little bit of buttermilk, which is just an off-white to a cream color. And of course, there has to be asphaltum in it for me, so asphaltum it is. Again, a color that's very difficult to find, so if you have to substitute, then turn to your burnt umber or your dark milk chocolate. Either one of those colors will substitute quite nicely. So that is it for colors. We're really not using a ton of colors. The other thing to have on hand is a stamp pad. It can be black. It can be a dark brown. It really doesn't matter. We're just looking for a dark color. If you don't have a stamp pad, then we're going to use a little bit of black paint, which will work just fine for what we're doing. So if you don't have a stamp pad, a black one, then we can use Americana black paint. I keep a brayer handy. You can do this with the side of a paint bottle, just by rolling it. It'll work just fine, but I like to have a brayer handy. A Snowflake stencil. Doesn't have to be exactly the one I use, but something with snowflakes in a variety of sizes. That's all you really need. Then, of course, you have to have your tag. This is a gorgeous chipboard tag. These are made by Southern Ridge Trading, Karen Beaupre's company. She does a beautiful job. They're reasonably priced, and the quality is really nice. They're a good rigid chipboard. And then this stunning little heart. I absolutely fell in love with this. The detail in it is exquisite. I love all those little minutiae. And so that's the reason that I chose this one, is because it has that delicate look and the detail is just beautiful. So there's our surface. There's our paint color. There's our texture mediums. The other thing that you're going to need will be a palette knife, a nice wide blade palette knife. If you don't have one of these on hand, an old credit card or a hotel key will work just fine. But this is what we're going to use. So supplies, simple. Stamp, any script stamp will do just fine. This one is from Stampendous. This one is called Vintage Note. It is CRP 249 is the item number. You can tell this one is well loved. I use this one a lot. And I use gold paint with it as well. And I use it with stamp pads and I use it with everything. So great little stamp, fairly generic, something with a script. Doesn't even have to be legible. It really doesn't matter. So it can be anything. As long as it's got some fancy writing on there, that's all you really need. So keep it simple. So the only other thing that's unusual in this piece is how to get this heart elevated on that. And for that, I used some of these little double-sided foam pads. They just pop out. They're adhesive on both sides to just lift it off the surface a little bit. I had to make do because I couldn't find these at first. I knew I had some, but couldn't find them. So I used 2 little wooden buttons to elevate it. They don't have to be any specific color. I just wanted something that was less wide than this bow, than this ribbon, so that it was hidden when I put everything together. So supply-wise, we don't need to have a ton of stuff. Oh, I almost forgot. We need a little sea sponge or a sponge dauber. I'm using a silk sea sponge. We need a little, or a sponge dauber will work just fine. One of those, you know, little things. But a little sea sponge will work just fine for what we're going to do. So I have to grab my now in the kits. I put a little bow, the ribbon in. It's actually quite easy to do. It's 1 inch wide by 6 inches long, and I just stamped or wrote the word joy on it. A bunch of them here. It doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be straight. I kind of like the fact that they're a little bit distressed and imperfect and irregular. I just find that that sort of lends a bit more to the finished piece. So, having said all of that, I think we're just about ready to get started on this piece. So we're going to start with developing that texture in the background. Now, I'm using a little bit of gesso, and when I say a little bit, I mean just a little bit. I'm only going to put a small amount on my palette knife, and most of it is going to come off. I'm just creating a little bit of background texture, so the application is extremely thin. I'm just very lightly and very loosely applying a little bit of background texture. I'm only going to cover, maybe 70% of the surface. So that's it. That tiny little bit, and then what's left on this knife will go back in the jar. So that tiny little bit is more than enough to create that irregular surface, was what we're looking for. It doesn't look like a lot, it really isn't, but it's enough to break up that smooth surface. So I'm going to clean my palette knife real quick here. So now, and because it's super thin, it dries quick. So I'm going to quickly dry this. I'm using a heat gun, but I have it set on low. I don't want to, if you heat this too quickly, it'll crack. almost there. So if there you have it, because it's nice and thin, it dries very, very fast. We don't want a ton of product on there. It is literally almost as if I just cleaned off my palette knife on the surface. It is extremely thin, but it still creates a little bit of surface texture, both tactile and visual. So when you run your hand over it, you can feel that there's some texture there, even though it's very low. And then from a visual standpoint, once we start putting color on, that's when all of that texture will really jump. So from here, you're going to apply 1 coat of buttermilk. This is not fully opaque. You can see that all of that texture is still showing through. So it's just 1 coat. That's all it really needs, just enough to give it a fairly uniform surface. I have another one base coated here that might show it better. There we go. So you don't need to have a fully opaque background for this. In fact, it works in your favor if it's not. So now from here, once we have that base coat in place, we're going to start developing the background. Now I'm going to do this 2 ways so that you can see the difference. There really isn't much of one, but I wanted you to see that you don't get much of a difference even though we've changed the technique slightly and the product slightly. So I'm going to use for the first one a little bit of fluid acrylic. So this is the one I'm going to use. So with the fluid acrylic, I'm going to use my script stamp. And I'm using a Stays-On stamp pad. It's always my preference when I'm using acrylic paint. And I'm going to stamp that on. It doesn't matter if it's perfect. Doesn't matter if it's legible. It really doesn't matter. So as long as I get a little bit of pattern in there, that's all I'm really looking for. So imperfection is fabulous. So now I'm going to set that aside to dry. So this is the one we're going to use for our fluid acrylic. And this one is the one we're going to use for the acrylic paint. We're using the Americana paints. So I'm going to start with that Laguna. I'm going to put a little bit on my palette here. Now, I know this is going to sound funny. I'm not using a brush to put this on. I'm going to use a high-tech applicator, which is 2 pieces of shop towel, one tucked into the other to create a little pillow, like so. I'm going to get the pillow wet, not drippy, just wet. And I'm going to pick up a little of that Laguna, and I'm going to literally rub that color all over this surface, like so. I'm going to let it be dark in some places and lighter in others. Love this color, it's so pretty. There are more than one way to skin a cat. Horrible saying, but it gets the point across. So there I have my Laguna all over the surface. And see how that texture popped up? Now you can see all of that texture that's in that background. Now I'm going to take my heat gun and I'm going to dry this very quickly. This just creates such a neat irregularity where the color catches on the edges of that texture that you put down, and yet you still have a fairly smooth painting surface. So I have that Laguna in place. This is where I'm going to take that ultra blue deep or the ultramarine blue, whatever you have on hand. And we're going to use, this is a brand new bowl. Using Sandy's technique for getting the plastic off. Little R-rated. So I'm going to do the same thing. Pick up a small amount of that Ultra Blue Deep on my cloth, and I'm going to pay particular attention to some of the corners and the edges. And I'm just going to lightly blend that color in. Ooh, pretty. And I'm going to come back down to the opposite corner and I'm going to do that again. I love the contrast that this creates. And I also love, look at how that texture pops again. All of that texture that you spent that time doing, it suddenly just comes to life when you put a little of that color in. Now I've chosen to do this in opposing corners for a reason. If you notice on this piece, all of the light is right here in that center piece, and it helps that heart pop off the surface. So this is our light right here. And that's going to help elevate that and give us great impact. So you can darken this if you feel the need to. You can also extend it a little bit if you want to get more onto that corners and up onto the side. Don't be shy. Pretty. And I'm going to dry this. So now that we have that in place, this is where that little brayer comes into play. So we're going to grab a little bit of black paint. I'm going to just carbon black or ebony or whatever black you have on hand. And I'm going to take my brayer, and it doesn't take much paint. I'm going to pull this palette into place so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to use my brayer, and I'm going to roll that black paint out like so that I have a fairly uniform coat of the black on my palette. I'm going to drop my brayer right back into the water dish. I'm going to come to that stamp this time, and I'm going to press my stamp into that black paint. And I'm going to add a little bit of script to my piece. And again, it doesn't matter if it's legible. It doesn't matter if it's perfect. It doesn't matter if it's light. I'm going to give another little bit on my stamp here. Little bits here and there just to fill in the space. There we go. And that's just using a little bit of acrylic paint instead of a stamp pad. Now we're getting the same effect regardless. If I was working with fluid acrylic, like I'm going to show you here in a moment, we're just reversing the process. So in this case, I used 2 opaque colors or semi-opaque colors over top of the base and then stamped on top of it. Had I stamped first, the lettering would have been considerably hidden by this. So I used the black at the end. So for the fluid acrylic, I'm going to apply the color, and I'm going to be using cobalt teal hue, sorry, and cobalt blue hue for this one. And I'm going to grab a nice, so I'm going to pick up a little bit of water, and I'm going to start with that cobalt teal. And I love using this color. It's just, they're so transparent and they're so vibrant. So I'm going to put that color, just sort of a slip slap, wishy-washy application. I'm going to let it be strong in some places, weaker in others. And whenever you want the color a little more intense, remember, these are transparent colors, so you can layer them. If you find the color is not quite strong enough for your taste, let it dry and put another coat on. And you can see they're very transparent. That stamping is still showing through just as if I had stamped over it. There we go. These do dry very quickly, but I'm still going to take that peek into that. Dry it real fast.
Georgia, to answer your question, we are going to put it up on YouTube.
So now our next step is to start adding some darker color, and in this case, I'm using that cobalt
Maureen,
blue,
I am recording it,
that
just
cobalt
so you know.
blue hue. Sorry. And I'm going to do something similar to what I did with the Americana version. I'm only going to apply it in a couple of places. And in this particular case, I'm using it on across the bottom and up into the corner, just sort of creating a shadow in that corner. And the same at the top. And again, if you don't get exactly what you want the first time out, don't worry about it. You can just simply let it dry and then apply another coat. If it looks a little bit sketchy in places, that's okay too. Use your fingers to smooth things out a little. Don't be shy. If you don't get dirty, you didn't have fun. It's my mother's rule. So, even though we did these with two different products and using the same technique but in reverse, we got a very similar result. This would also look so pretty in shades of red. Just change the stencil a little bit to create a different feel. I think this would be gorgeous for Valentine's Day. Do it in a gorgeous rich red, two reds in that background with a touch of pink. Add the gold, add the, take the joy away and put love on it. It's such an easy technique to customize to your own tastes and to the event. So here is my fluid acrylic. This is my Americana. So now we're going to move to the next step, which is adding some snowflakes. Now we're going to start with white paint. And in this case, I'm using warm white. You can use titanium white. You can use whatever white you have on hand. I'm just partial to warm white. Now, the stencil that I'm using is, I have two here. This is Snowflake ST19. I like this one because I love this snowflake in particular. But on the other one, which is ST30, I love this snowflake in particular. So, and it comes with a smaller version. So I'm going to actually use both of these stencils just for giggles. I'm going to use, on the fluid acrylic one, I'm going to use 30, and on the Americana one, I'm going to use 19. Just to create a little difference between the two. Now, the stencil, initially you're going to use it like this, as an all over pattern. So I'm going to hold it in place, and I'm just going to lightly stencil over top of wherever the stencil overlaps this tag. I'm just using the warm white. You don't really have to work too hard to do this one because the stencil is laid out nicely so that you can get a nice mixture of snowflakes on your piece without having to be too selective. Eek. Okay, so I have snowflakes on my tag. And I'm going to do the same thing to this one. I'm just going to position it so that I get a nice variety of snowflakes on my piece. And I'm going to use that warm white. Now you can tell that I am not looking for fully opaque snowflakes. I'm just trying to create a little pattern in this background. And I like this little this stencil in particular, because it has these itty bitty teeny tiny ones that sort of fill in a little bit of, you know, perhaps some dead space or what have you. There we go. I'm just going to quickly go over this a little bit. There we go. So neatness doesn't count. Perfection is to be avoided at all costs. And I have snowflakes on this one. So now we have this. It's a little subtle, which is fine. Subtlety is never a bad thing when it comes to design work. So it just creates a little pattern in that background. It's pretty, pretty. So I'm going to take that heat gun and I'm going to dry this really quick. There we go. So now we're going to age this just a little and subtly. And I'm going to do that. There's a couple of ways to do this. I'm going to age the edges of the Americana one with the stamp pad. And all I do is just, I lay that stamp pad on the edge. And as I change the pitch of that stamp pad, so if you'll notice, if it's straight up and down like this, it's only going to do the absolute outside edge. If I tip it in towards the end and almost lay it flat, I get a bit more on the edge. So it's actually quite easy to control. I just don't want to have so much that it makes the tag look heavy, but I do want it to have some irregularities. There we go. I just love how this looks. I just think it gives this some wear and some age. So there we go. Our stamp pad has created a nice aged look. So there is a way to create something similar just using acrylic paint. So I'm going to grab my black paint again. And I'm going to find a nice round, or oh, there's a rigger. That will do the trick. You need a round brush or something with a little bit of a belly. And you're going to load it up with black paint. And I like to go around, just sort of push and pull along the edges. So I'm just pushing, get a closer look here. I push toward and push, pull back. So a push and pull motion with it. And it sort of creates that broken edge similar to what the stamp pad did. So if you don't have the stamp pad, this works really, really well. And you can be selective about where you get those big breaks or those big chunks out of the edges of it. Be very selective. So obviously the finer you do it, the more subtle that finish will be, and the heavier you do it, the more aggressive it will be. But I kind of like that just slightly broken edge. So you just push and pull, roll the brush along the edge like so. So there is that sort of chippy look along the edges of it, similar to what that stamp pad creates. There we go. So now we have two completely different techniques to achieve a similar look. So if you don't have the stamp pad available to you, then you can, by all means, you can use that. Use that paint version. I'm going to hold them in place and just dry this real quick. Nice. So now we have, I keep sliding, I'm sorry, I keep sliding over out of the shot here. There, just let me know when okay. So now we have the same edge on both of these. This is the Americana with the stamp pad, and this one is the fluid acrylic, and I used acrylic paint to create that outside edge. We have our stenciling in the background. So now we're going to start burying this back, and it's going to change the overall tone of these tags. I'm using a little bit of asphaltum. This is an Americana color. It kind of looks like a chocolatey brown. It's actually a yellow based brown, so it has a high degree of yellow in it. It's also a transparent color, so it gives you a yellow cast over things. So if I put this over top of a white or cream color, it's going to give me sort of a golden brown warm look. But because it has a yellow base and I'm putting it over top of a blue, it kind of gives us this subtle green cast, which is going to age this really nicely. So I'm going to, again, use one of my high-tech applicators.
What color was that
Just
again?
a piece of shop towel torn in quarters, bundled into a little pillow, and then tucked inside the other quarter to form this little pillowcase. I'm going to get it nice and wet, not drippy, but wet.
Tracy, can you hear me?
A small amount of asphaltum. Now, if you don't have the asphaltum, you can do this with the burnt umber, but use it very sparingly. The burnt umber is made to flatten colors out. So in order to keep it under control, use it in very small quantities. So I'm going to take that asphaltum and I'm going to rub a small amount in the same way I put the blue on. I'm going to go in very light circles, and it's going to subdue all of that. It also accentuates those textures that we created. It softens the impact of those colors. It sort of melds things, and it ages things quite nicely. Now I'm using it sparingly because you don't want to overpower this. Now, once I have that first coat on, and it is subtle, I'm going to take an angle and I'm going to float around the edges of this piece with the asphaltum along that edge where that aging is, where we spent so much time putting that aged edge. I'm going to float that asphaltum along there. This is a little more subtle, but it gives a nice distressed look to the edges. And you'll note, I am not really worrying about it being a perfect float. I just want the darkest value to the outside edge of this tag. And then we're going to do something really fun. Now you can continuously adjust this to suit yourself. So if you prefer to see it narrow along the outside edge, then let it be. If you like to see it darker, like me, I really like that heavily antiqued edge, you can float it wider. And don't be shy. This is the nice thing about working with transparent layers of color, is that you have complete control over how dark or light they get. I also like how this asphaltum accentuates some of that texture that you put down yet again. There we go. Now, if at any time that you feel it is getting a little heavy-handed, like I'm finding that the center of this one is just getting a bit heavy in here, take your applicator, turn it inside out. That outside edge, turn it inside out, and then you can come back through the center and you can literally pull a little color off. Won't take it all off, but it'll take enough off that you can get some of that highlight back, which is what I needed through here. So I'm going to pay a little attention to my edges now. I'm going to be a little more aggressive with the color. I wanted a darker edge, but I don't want it dark in the middle. So I'm going to, oopsie, there. So I have to take that apart. I'm going to take a little bit of a clean applicator, and I'm going to pull color off of that center. There we go. And now I'm going to float a little asphaltum around the edge of this one. I'm really quite partial to that darker edge, but that's just me. I love how, if you look down here, you can really see how that texture pops up as you're working. Love how this looks. And there we go. This is our Americana version over here, and this is our fluid acrylic version. Both look really, really good. So we have our stenciling done, we have our stamping done, we have our texture done, we have our aging on the edges complete. So we're going to do one last step with this, and I love this particular technique. I think it looks so cool. It repeats part of the pattern that you've worked so hard to create, but it also creates a little bit of a lighter contrast, a very pretty contrast. And I'm going to do that with a little bit of that gold. Now, if you happen to have a gold stamp pad, by all means, use it. But I'm going to use a little bit of this gold. And I'm coming back with my brayer. And I'm going to roll out this gold paint. Where did my stamp go? There it is. So here's my stamp. Now, I've rolled out a little bit of this gold paint on my brayer, like so. And I'm going to roll it directly onto my stamp, like so. The reason I'm rolling this one is because the paint is quite thick. It doesn't roll out as smoothly on the palette. And so stamping into it, it just makes a gooey mess. Whereas if you load up the brayer with gold paint and roll it onto the stamp, it works much better. So I'm going to take that gold paint and I'm going to apply it to my surface. Now, the effect is subtle, but it's very pretty. So you get that little bit of that repeat of the pattern. So I have the black in the background and I stamped right over it with the gold. And it creates a nice effect, but it's very subtle. So it's this soft and delicate shimmer of color in the background. So I've put a little gold onto that one, and let's do the Americana one. Now the metallic I'm using is DecoArt's Extreme Sheen, a 24 karat gold, but you could use any one you wanted, any bright metallic. So even a bright silver would look very pretty on this. So there's the gold. There. So I have a little bit of gold in each of those. So now it's time to set these guys aside to dry, and then we're going to start working on this heart. I'm going to, there is our heart. Now, I lost my pad. Oh my goodness. Sorry guys, I had a pad set aside to do this on, and now I can't find it. So I'm going to grab a sheet of paper. So I have the heart right here. And I'm using a silk sea sponge, which is a very fine, it's got a fine texture on it. as you can see here, and it's a small one. So I'm using this Silk Sea sponge. You can use a sponge dauber. You could use a sponge brush if you want to. You could use a brush to do this, but honestly, this is just faster and easier. So I'm going to pick up a little of that gold paint, and I'm just going to dab that color on. You don't need to make it fully opaque. Just want to get some of that color on this heart. So if you miss a few spots, that's okay. We've got two other colors going on here. There it is. So I like sponging my gold for a couple of reasons. It creates a nice pebbled texture on the surface, and it ends up actually looking quite a bit like an embossing powder by the time I'm done. So having said that, you could use any one of Emerald Creek's embossing powders to create this effect. Kim's got some absolutely phenomenal embossing powders and mixtures. I mean, she creates some of the coolest things. So I'm pretty sure that she's got something that will do this as well. So I've used a sponge. It's created a little bit of texture on that surface. So I'm going to very quickly dry this. Metallics take a little bit longer than most. So now I've got my gold on. I love this extreme sheen. Look at the shimmer of this metallic. It's just so pretty. It's my favorite metallics. And I am a die-hard DecoArt goddess. I absolutely love their metallics, the dazzling metallics. But when they put out these extreme sheens, oh my gosh. Just these make my knees wobble because of the shimmer you get out of them and the opacity. I mean, these cover like no other metallic. They're fantastic. So now that I've got that gold on, I want to create a little bit of a patina, and I want it to tie directly to the color palette that's in our tag. So I'm going to use a little bit of that Laguna that I used in the background, that teal, green, blue. I'm going to use a little bit of that on a sponge. Now I'm using the dirty sponge. I didn't bother cleaning it. And I'm going to just add that color in a few spots along the edges towards the center. Don't be shy with it, but you want to keep this fairly subtle. It's just to bring the two colors together, to tie this heart to the background. So I'm using that little bit of teal, and I'm using it in small amounts and just in a few select spaces. So you can see it's just picked up a tiny bit of that color and in a few locations. And it subdues the gold a little bit, and it gives it a little bit of a patina. Love this color. So there we have it. So we have our little bit of patina on there. So now we're going to age this to bring it into the same ballpark as our tag. And I'm going to do that. You can do that with either the burnt umber, or as I'm doing it in this case with asphaltum, because it's my favorite color.
While Tracy's doing that, if you noticed her garbage paper
this is the one I
before,
probably use the most. So
use
now
it
I'm
as a
going to
die
take
cut.
that asphaltum and I'm going to age the outside edge of this heart. And I've just picked up a little asphaltum on the tip of my brush as if I'm going to float. So I only want that color to catch on the outside edge of this heart. Like so. I like how it sort of ages the edge a little bit. It also subdues both the gold and that blue just a little. So it gives the overall feeling of this warm aged patina all over the surface. So I'm almost done with the outside edge. I'm going to come in towards the center. And I'm not using this colorful strength. It's just a little bit. I'm just using what's left over to sort of warm up that inside edge of this heart. I want to keep it subtle in here. I don't want to overdo it. It'll just end up looking dirty and dark. And I don't want that. So just a little bit on that inside edge. And so this is the end result. It sort of gives you that patinated, warm, aged look so that things are not perfect. The gold has been subdued just a little. It still has a little bit of that shimmer and sparkle, which is why I used it in the first place. How pretty. And you can adjust this so that if you find it's too bright or you want it darker, then by all means use a little bit more. I will probably, as we go, adjust this a bit more, but I think I'm pretty satisfied with it the way it is. See, it's quite pretty. And it plays up and picks up on that gold. Remember that little flash of gold that we put in the background? So those two colors actually pick up on each other quite nicely. Very pretty. So now we have our tag. So this is just cardstock. I haven't done anything over the top with this. This is just cardstock. And I'm going to age the edges of this with the same thing we aged the heart with, just a float of asphaltum. Now, because it's cardstock, it's quite porous. So I'm going to start at the edge. I have a lot of water in my brush for this, a lot. So that paper is going to get wet, which is okay. So I'm going to do the same thing along the top. I have oodles of water in this brush for a reason. I want this to get wet. I want that ribbon to get wet. And it does two things. It allows those colors to blend and bleed together. So it gives me an aged look on this banner, but it also softens that paper so I can manipulate it a little. And this is where that matte medium comes in. Remember the matte medium that we talked about at the beginning, or the Mod Podge or the DecoArt decoupage? I prefer the matte medium because I love the way this stuff dries, but you know, we work with what we can get our hands on. So I'm going to grab a nice soft brush. Oh, here, I've got a flat here. I'll use that. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of that matte medium, and I'm going to just brush a thin coat over the front of this piece, like so. And then you're going to use the handle of your brush, and I'm going to curl those points just by wrapping them around that brush. And it's only going to be, oh, maybe half an inch or so. And then I'm going to take that and just dry it quickly. I don't want it to harden completely. There, look at that. So now we have tips, and I'm going to do the same thing to the other end. Just curl those tips. And I'm going to roll it about a half an inch just so that they come in. And that little bit of heat, see, it gives us that roll on the ribbon. Now, a couple of things. You can take your gold paint that you used on a brush, just a little, and you can just dab the edges of the paper with a little gold paint, like so. And it creates just a little bit of sparkle. You can use a gold stamp pad to burnish the edges of this to give you a gold line, or you can use a gold paint pen to do this. Now I'm using one of these, the DecoColor gold paint pens. And I just run the pen along the edge like so. Like I said, you can do this with paint or you can do it with a paint pen, or you don't have to do it at all. But I like that little bit of bling on the edges of things. So I'm just going to use that gold paint pen. And neatness doesn't count. Perfection is to be avoided at all costs. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, it's much more effective if it's not. So we have our little ribbon done. We have our little heart done. And we have our tag. So now it's time to start constructing this, putting this all together. Get rid of the junky paper. So I used 2 little wooden buttons that I glued into place for mine, but you can use just these little adhesive sponge risers, I guess. I'm not sure what, spacers, I guess is what they're called. But I used 2 little buttons. So I'm going to start by applying my ribbon to this. Now you can use matte medium as your adhesive, or you can use glue or glue gun or glue dots. I've used any and all of the above to put this on. And you're going to, in this case, I'm going to use my little adhesive dots. And I'm going to position this, one here on my heart and the other, thank heavens these are two-sided, I'm going to put down here like so. Now my heart, my ribbon, would look okay just glued on. I like to bend it a little bit so that my ribbon catches on the point like so, and then force it so it gets a little bit of an elevation, like a little height in the middle. I think I made it a little too far though. I'm gonna lower this a little bit. There we go. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. Just so that it has that little bit of elevation in the middle of the ribbon. Comme ça. Now, when you apply this to the tag, you can do it however you like it. So if you want it right in the center, I'm still not happy with mine. Let me move this a bit. It's a little too high, I think. That's got wonky in the middle. There we go. That's a little bit better. So you can decide entirely where you position this on your tag is entirely up to you. So I rather like that canted element, so it's just not quite straight. And I like it when a portion of it comes off the tag. It just creates a little more interest. So I need to turn my piece over and take a couple more of these little things. Now I put them under the ribbon. This way they're out of sight, out of mind. Put one there, press it into place, and then you can peel that little backing off. Now you can do this with whatever glue you want to use, just like the ribbon, you can apply it, whatever works for you. So I'm going to press mine into place like so. And there we have that. So now our heart is in place. So the last thing that I do for most things, and I completely forgot about this, I'm going to take this off because I forgot something. Tell you, lights are on, nobody's home. So I'm going to pop mine off of here before it becomes permanently adhered. I knew there was something I was forgetting. Forgive me, guys. I had a moment. almost forgot. We have one really fun technique and I almost blew it. So I'm going to choose this snowflake. Remember the snowflake stencil? I really like this one. So I'm going to put this in position like so. Now in this original one, forgive me, I got way ahead of myself. I have these bright white snowflakes in the background right in here. And those ones are actually elevated. So they have a little bit of height. So I'm going to use a little of my gesso and my palette knife. And I'm going to put just a thin layer, no thicker than the stencil. You should be able to see that stencil right through it like that. Thin layer, don't press too hard. Put it on and then scrape the excess off so that you can see that snowflake. And then peel back your stencil. It leaves behind a raised snowflake. And I'm going to do one more over here. Just a thin amount of that gesso. You don't need a ton of it. I got so excited I completely forgot 2 steps. And two important ones. So there is my raised snowflakes, nice and bright. I'm going to do it on the other ones too. I'm going to switch out the stencil though, and I'm going to use this one because I like this snowflake. So let's do that one more time. Put the stencil in position, put a thin layer of that gesso over top of your chosen snowflake, and then scrape off the excess. And then carefully pull the stencil back towards you. It leaves a slightly raised image on the background. Then move your stencil and repeat it. Now I like 2. You could put on as many as you want, but I like 2 or 3. So now that those are done, our heart is done and our banner is done and it's ready to go on, I'm going to dry this. And again, it's not super thick, so it's not going to take very long to dry. A couple seconds more, it should be good. Now, if you want to, and I say if you want to, you can take a little asphaltum and age the edges, or you can leave it as is. I'm going to age the edges just a little bit. And that's just done with a weak float of asphaltum right over the edge. Don't want to bury those bright white snowflakes, but this kind of just sort of marries them to the piece. So then I'm going to quickly dry that. And then the most important part, I can't believe I almost forgot to do that. I'm all about texture. I don't know why I missed that one. So this is dry. And this is where you get to add some sparkle. Now there's so many different ways you can do this. There are the Galaxy glitters. There are the craft twinkles. There are glamour dust. There's a variety of different things. You can take even stuff that is sort of outside of our normal decorative painting. Don't be afraid to try something different. I got this. This is Glitter Kiss, which is a sparkly paste. Who makes this one? Creative Expressions in the UK makes this one. It even comes with its own applicator in the lid, a little sponge applicator. And this stuff is fun. It's like a gel. And it dries permanent, but it's like super glittery. It's awesome stuff. Works really nicely on paper. Works nicely on a variety of things. But this is the one that I'm obsessed with lately. This is the Galaxy varnish. This is the DuraClear varnish, but they've added just this amazing holographic glitter to it. And this is the one that I've been using for everything lately. I love this stuff. And the reason I love it is because it's subtle. Well, kind of. I'm going to put a little daub in the middle here, and I'm going to grab my, where is my fugly brush? There's, no, I don't want that one. I want this one. So I love this stuff because it's got a great glitter in it, but it isn't in your face. So I'm just going to brush that out over the surface like so. You should be almost able to see the sparkles already. But I love how this stuff glitters. The glitter is highly reflective and it changes color, which just gets my juices flowing. So, you know, turn it one way and it looks green, turn it another way and it looks gold. And I love that it has, you know, shows off a variety of colors without being over the top. And you get great shimmer out of it. So I'm going to try this. I'm almost ready to see this. I love how this stuff works. On black, it's amazing. On any dark color, it's freaking amazing. It's great stuff. And I love that when it dries, more sparkles pop up. See, this one is showing me all kinds of blue and turquoise and silver and white. And I'm going to try and see if you can see this. I just love how this just sparkles. It's not an in-your-face glitter, but it's super elegant and it's just so pretty on things. And I love that holographic effect where it changes color. You turn it one way and it's gold, the next it's green, and it's very pretty. Love how this stuff looks. So now that I am not so far ahead of myself, I can take my piece and I can position it on the surface where I want it and then press that adhesive into place. Now, I tend to spatter things, so I will spatter this with a little bit of asphaltum. I got my fugly brush here. I'm going to pick up a little bit of asphaltum and some water. I like to age things, and I'm going to just lightly, I want a fine splatter, not a heavy one. I'm going to spatter over top. And that is it. That is as difficult as this piece gets. So you've got all of those pretty layers, sort of a faux embossing powder, if you will, on that heart with a little bit of patina and the aging. This paper ribbon in the middle, and then that raised snowflake up in there to give you that brightness and that pop. All of that texture and the antique mediums to create this nice warm aged look. And if that doesn't give you a little bit of joy, I don't know. This was a lot of fun. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I'm going to switch over to the other camera and I will join you in 2 seconds.
All right, well, Tracy's coming to join us. That was fantastic. I don't know about everyone else. Not being a painter, I have now found the glitter adhesive. I sell a lot of glitter embossing powders, but I do like the quick application of glitter. That is my favorite.
Hi, guys.
The gold pen. Welcome back, Tracy. That gold paint pen, something I hadn't seen before, so that was fantastic. And
can you guys hear me?
Yep, we hear you. Tracy, I hear you. It's your speaker. You can't hear us. I can hear you. I hear you, Tracy.
How about now?
I hear you.
Okay, good.
You couldn't hear us, but we could hear you.
Well, I couldn't hear anybody, so.
I was just saying that was such a wonderful project and how excited we were I learned stuff. So I'm excited that I got to sit and participate and learn. The glitter glaze, I'm totally getting that.
Oh my God, that glitter is absolutely phenomenal. I love the way it looks.
I feel like
it's
it's
such a great
Christmas card with a paint of that over top of it.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we have